So as we're continuing on down the channel strip, we got through EQ.
Yep.
The next thing most guys are going to see or need to employ, even if it's an analog plug-in or something, is compression. It's kind of a dirty word. What does it actually do? Why do we have it?
Yeah.
What's it there for?
Yeah.
But can we explain in a pretty simple way, like what it does and why it's such a useful tool across a mix?
Because a lot of people see all these numbers and they don't know what they mean and how they relate.
Right. My first experience with compression ratio was my dad's 87 Monte Carlo again when he put a bigger cam and pistons in it. But anyway. Okay, so with a compressor, most general compressors have, are you done?
I'm just picturing just barreling down the road in your dad's car. I want to ride in this car.
Yeah, I really need a Monte Carlo in my
With
life.
the radio turned way up.
Yeah.
And a big old carburetor just cranking down the road.
A Holly 4-barrel to be
Come
exact.
on now.
All right.
Man, you've got grease on your nails and stuff. This is good.
You can take the boy out of Tennessee.
Yeah, man. This is good, Lee. We're learning a lot about you talking about channel strips. It's good.
All right.
So continue.
Okay, so compressor threshold, ratio, attack, release, and makeup gain.
Okay.
Those are basically what you're going to find on every compressor.
Right.
This has got a lot more options. We're not really going to get into all that right now. So let me just run down that list and give a brief explanation of what each one is. So the most important part is probably the threshold, and that simply is at what point in the signal will the compressor start working. So it's all based on the amount of input signal.
So you think of it as the signal passing over that threshold.
Yes.
And then that part is what gets processed.
Correct. So this little green dot up here is the threshold, and as I lower that, you'll see the compressor start to engage, okay? So at that point, where the threshold is now is when the compressor is going to start working based on this input signal. So if I lower the gain of this channel, that's just pink noise, this would also change.
Right.
If I raise it, it will also change.
So it's something to keep in mind as you start putting in
You
these
have to.
tools. And if you're constantly going back to your gain to readjust it, now you've just messed up the math that's happening here.
Correct.
Part of the reason why we want a robust input signal is because if that input was way down at minus 30,
Right.
you'd have to bring the threshold way down to get any kind of gain reduction.
That's exactly right.
And any kind of result.
Okay, so we've got our ratio, we've got our threshold, now we're gonna go to ratio. So compressor ratio it's a little bit of math. We're gonna go back to middle school here for a second, but it's a ratio of input to output. So for every, right now we're at 2 to 1.
Okay.
For every 2 dB of signal that crosses the threshold, it will only allow 1 dB to output the backside of the compressor.
So this gain reduction here is a representation of what's not getting through the threshold.
Right, this is our reduction meter. So we're hitting probably 3.5 to 4 dB of reduction right now. So if we raise the ratio, the amount of reduction also changes.
I'm just going to say, they grow them pretty smart in Tennessee. I'm pretty impressed.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
So now we're
All
at
right.
10 to 1. So for every 10 dB crosses the threshold, now I'm only letting 1 hit the output of the compressor.
Right.
Another way, the more you start cranking your threshold down, the more this starts to go down. So your compressor and your ratio really act hand in hand. So you can achieve the same amount of reduction with 2 different ratios, 2 different thresholds, based on where they are.
Right.
So what's the application? When would you want to use compression? When would you want to use a lot?
Yep.
When would you prefer to only use a little?
So if you have a musician or an input signal that's really dynamic, let's take a bass guitar. They can be some really soft things happening, and then all of a sudden you may have a 20 dB spike in signal. That's a great example where you would want a high ratio of compression or even limiting. So it's not an exact science, but anything over 8 or 10 to 1 of a ratio is really considered a limiter.
Right.
So with a bass guitar, you want to set your threshold low enough to where the low stuff is compressing, and also if he slaps on the bass or hits it really hard and it goes 10 dB across the threshold, only 1 dB is outputting on the compressor.
Almost as if you stopped it.
Correct.
Like you limited it.
You're just squeezing
stopped it.
You're just putting a ceiling on the whole thing and smashing it down.
Okay, so as you keep going down this, you talked about attack.
Yep.
How does it apply to this?
Super important, especially with things like drums, vocals.
A lot of transients.
Things with transients. So the attack time it's time. How long is the compressor going to wait to start working once the input signal has crossed the threshold? And it's usually set in milliseconds. So the fastest time on this is 0.03 milliseconds.
That's pretty fast.
And as I turn this knob, it's a great explanation of how this would work. So now I'm at 100 milliseconds. So the threshold is here. We're going to wait 100 milliseconds, and now we're starting to work.
Application of that.
Drums, let's really quickly.
Yeah.
So if you want some snap and attack in your drums, if your compressor attack time is too fast, it will actually shave off the transient of the drum. So you need to allow the attack and the actual hit of the stick to the drum to pass through the microphone before you start compressing it.
That's great.
On the other hand, if you're using it as a group compressor for drums, you might want to have it really fast so that you're only getting the body of the sound of that without the transients.
Yep.
So there may be an application where it's different, but just to understand the concept is so important because the attack time can make such a difference.
The attack time is really kind of like a high frequency knob almost. You can look at it that way, like how much transient, how much sibilance, how much pops and clicks do you want in or not.
That's good.
So the release, you know where this is going. This is the amount of time that we're going to wait for the compressor to release its compression once the input has gone the other side of the threshold, once it's back across to the left, so to speak.
And this is hugely important. For years, I didn't know what the attack and release meant.
Yeah.
I just kind of mess with it. It can make the difference in how a compressor reacts.
Totally.
How much you hear it in the mix or feel it.
Yep.
That's a difference.
Yep.
The attack and release is a big, big deal.
It is, especially with vocals. I've seen release times be so long with the vocal. It can be a really loud note and it's in compression, but then the next note is soft and you don't want it in compression, but then you've lost all your headroom because the release hasn't had enough chance to return back to normal volume yet. You're still 10 dB lower than you should be.
Okay, so the last thing, wrapping up this compressor thing, is output gain, or some consoles, it's called makeup gain. Quickly, how does that kind of affect this?
So let's think about bass guitar again with the ratio of 20-1, really slamming it, and it's just buried. Well, now I've just cut my input signal down almost 18 dB.
Wow.
It's 18 dB quieter than it was before. So if your fader was here before, in essence, just based off compression, you've turned it down almost 20 dB.
Yeah.
Right.
So sometimes you're going to need to now raise the signal back up. That's what this will do. So instead of using the fader and adding 18 dB, you can't, right? You still want high resolution mixing, having the fader somewhere decent. Then you just do it here and raise the overall level that way.
That's another thing that I always ignored when I was a young mixer. I would just try to push the fader up and be confused and kind of hacked off at it, why it didn't work right. And then someone showed me, dude, and now you've turned up the compressed signal.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you just found magic.
Yeah. But it's not automatic that you would always match the amount of gain reduction with output gain. It's not a zero-sum gain all the time.
No.
It is what is the most musical. If the body of the tonality is changed in a way that I find pleasing, but I'm not able to hear it as much, okay, I'm going to make up some of that gain. So it really is understanding these things is great because you know how it works, but it really is what are your ears telling you, not what are your eyes telling you, not what is the math, but what's the music.
Right.